Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start today's video with a story about every pet sitter's worst nightmare, a paranoid, impossible-to-please client who takes micromanaging to a whole new level. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. My job? Dog walking. My reality? Customer surveillance. I'm a dog walker / pet sitter and have been working for a small company for 6 months now. I've owned pets all my life and have worked in a doggy daycare before, so it isn't like I had no prior experience working with animals before joining this company. Even with my prior experience, there are still some learning curves with each new pet in my care. It sometimes takes me a bit to figure out different equipment like harnesses, collars, and cones, especially because I want to make sure they're on correctly for the animal's safety. On Tuesday morning, I had 2 German Shepherds to feed, walk, and administer medication. One of the dogs wears a cone due to a medical issue he's recovering from, and I needed to take the cone off to feed him. When I went to put the cone back on, I noticed there was a broken piece hanging that I didn't want to mess with further, so it took me some time to figure out the correct way to get the cone on. I started hearing some noise from the dog camera, and it was the owner. It was hard to hear exactly what she was saying, but she sounded frustrated. As I'm working through trying to get the cone on, she starts yelling at me, "That's not right!" So I take a second to look at the cone to put it on correctly, and the dog goes to lick its paw. The owner then yells, "Do you even have a dog?" He's not supposed to do that. Like, duh, I know. Now I'm flustered and trying to get this cone on right. As I almost have it on, she calls me and basically tells me it shouldn't be that hard to put the cone on, which I agree with. But it was my first time putting on a cone like that, and having her yell at me wasn't helping the situation. She just spoke to me in such a condescending way, treating me like I was an idiot for not getting it right immediately. I also want to mention that this walk took place around 6 o'clock to 6:30 a.m. on the East Coast. When the owner called me, the caller ID was from California, which meant she was up at 3 a.m. watching my every move during the visit. I'd been warned by a coworker the night before that she watches the cameras, but this felt extreme. My coworker also mentioned having a similar experience with the client being rude and warned me ahead of time. Apparently, after my visit, she called one of my managers and was rude to her too. Now, I completely understand that as a pet owner, you want to make sure your animals are being cared for properly, especially those with medical issues. I also understand that it's scary to leave your pet with someone unfamiliar, especially when they're not fully accustomed to the pet. Of course, if there's something I'm doing wrong, I want to fix it right away and make sure I'm doing it correctly, but there's no need to yell at me and make me feel stupid in the process. There's a way to speak to people respectfully, and yelling and getting frustrated just makes it harder for me to do my job. The one thing I'll give her credit for is that she did apologize on the phone for getting frustrated, but her apology didn't mean much because she continued to be rude to my managers and other coworkers. According to the owner of the company, she's called to complain nearly every time we visited, even though we were all doing our best to follow the rules exactly as written in her notes. The rules also kept changing, which made it even more frustrating to try and keep her satisfied. She's just unreasonable and impossible to work with. So luckily, we fired her as a client moving forward. It's such a shame because her dogs are absolute sweethearts. Thanks for letting me vent my frustrations. I just needed to get it off my chest. Your company and you do not need to accept her as a customer or supply services to her due to her behavior. They should refuse any further service to her. Instead of berating the person trying to put the cone on, she should give some directions, help her out. I'd hate to see this Karen handle her kids' homework. And our second story. My child-hating friend is angry we took our son on a trip, even though she said it was fine. Me, 29-year-old male, and my wife, Angie, 27-year-old female, have a son, Sam, turned 2 this week. We're part of a friend group made up of 7 people, including us. There's one more couple in the group. The other 3 are Zoe, 32-year-old female, Greg, 41-year-old male, and Tim, 30-year-old male. Zoe doesn't like kids. She openly avoids them whenever she can. I've always known about this and have no problem with it. There have, however, been occasions in which she seemed to take it a bit too far. The friend group lives all over the country now, and most of us only get together once or twice a year. This January, we all decided to take a 5-day trip to Greg's beach house. It's in a different state and a 2-hour flight away. Both Greg and Tim have children. Greg made sure to invite us over while his kid would be with his ex, but Tim is a single father and couldn't afford to leave his daughter with a babysitter for 5 days. Due to that, it was decided that both Tim's daughter and Sam were welcome on the trip. Angie and I offered to leave Sam with my mother-in-law, but the whole group, including Zoe, said it was fine. All of these decisions were made 2 months in advance. 2 days prior to the trip, Tim informed us that his daughter had chickenpox and he had to cancel their tickets to stay with her. At that, Zoe called Angie and said, "Guess your mom will have a busy week." My mother-in-law was traveling and wouldn't be back for another week. We had no other babysitting options available or time to find one, so we told Zoe that we were still bringing Sam with us. Zoe protested, saying that she was only okay with having kids around during the trip because she knew Tim had no choice and we had no excuse to bring Sam now that Tim's daughter wasn't coming anymore, but we held our ground. The others took our side. During the trip, Angie and I made efforts to help Zoe avoid Sam as much as possible. This ended up making our own trip underwhelming as we were spending a lot of time apart and didn't get to see our friends as much as we wanted to, but it worked. Zoe and Sam were in the same room a total of 4 times, including both our arrival and departure from Greg's house. In spite of that, she insisted that we ruined her trip by bringing him and that it was selfish of us not to consider her feelings about children after Tim dropped out. Zoe hasn't spoken to us since we flew back home. This week, she unfollowed Angie on Instagram 10 minutes after she made a post for Sam's 2nd birthday, so I think she's still bitter. Angie's been feeling guilty about this. I tried to reassure her we had no other option, and it was unreasonable of Zoe to ask us to change our plans at the last minute like that. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't consider we might be in the wrong. It's a strange double standard for her to be understanding that Tim had no choice, but not be willing to extend the same courtesy to you when Tim's plans had to change. From what you describe, you also had no choice at that point. What, did she expect you to predict with your magic 8-ball that you should have your mother-in-law on backup duty just in case Tim's plans fell through? It's so bogus. And our last story. The police sided with trespassers on my land. Now I'm fighting back. I live in South Carolina near the coast in a relatively rural area where land is a big deal. Behind my house, I have a private garden exactly 1 acre square hidden behind an 8-foot privet hedge with 2 archway entrances, one of which I'm in the process of turning into a proper pathway. Beyond that garden's another section of my land, a 1 acre by 2 acre rectangle where I've been constructing an annex. Right now, only the frames are up and half of the back perimeter's already secured with an 8-foot wooden fence. The other half still has a post fence, which I've been gradually replacing. I also have multiple signs clearly stating that this is private property, mostly because I've had ramblers assume it's an open field due to the road nearby leading into other farmland. Until recently, all was well. Then I saw smoke. A few days ago, while I was tending my garden, I noticed smoke rising from behind the privet hedge. Confused, I walked around to check it out, and that's when I saw it. A full-blown traveler camp had appeared on my land. My 8-foot fence had been smashed down, and several caravans and trucks were parked right where I'd been building my annex. Worse, the frames of the annex were gone, so was my construction machinery. I immediately did what any sane landowner would do. I called the police. About 20 minutes later, a couple of officers arrived. They went to talk to the travelers first before coming back to me. Their response? They assumed this was commercial land. I blinked. What? The officer shrugged and said, "There's nothing to say you actually own this land, so there's no legal basis for us to remove them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me, this is my property. I have the land deeds. The second officer crossed his arms and said, "Land deeds are all well and good, but unless you have an official map with outlined borders, it doesn't mean anything." I pointed to my partially built annex, or what was left of it. I was literally constructing a building here. You think I was just building an annex on land that wasn't mine? Instead of listening, they flipped it on me. Well, technically, without proper land registration records, you could be arrested for illegally building on public land. I was stunned. They completely ignored the fact that my construction equipment was missing. When I tried to report it stolen, one of the officers gave me a warning for stereotyping travelers As if that wasn't enough, they basically told me to fence it off if I had a problem. If it's such an issue, just put a fence over the privet hedge. That's apparently your border, isn't it? Then they had the audacity to tell me, don't waste police time again. And with that, they left. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. Not only had the police refused to help, but they'd effectively told the travelers that I reported them. Now, every day I hear shouting and abuse from their camp. They've even thrown broken bottles over the hedge into my garden. The very next morning, I hired a fencing company to come in and seal off the openings in the privet hedge, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. The police had already failed me, so I contacted a property lawyer and got in touch with a private security firm. The lawyer's gathering my land records, including satellite images and historical documentation that prove without a doubt that this is my land. We're in the process of filing for a court order to have the travelers forcibly removed. At the same time, the security firm's been monitoring the situation and documenting every instance of trespassing, harassment, and damage. This morning, something finally changed. A high-ranking legal representative from my lawyer's office called the local authorities on my behalf. They presented the documentation proving I owned the land and filed an official complaint about police misconduct. That must have put some fire under them because suddenly officers were very interested in helping. This afternoon, 2 different officers showed up. This time they actually spoke to me first. They acknowledged the clear proof of ownership and admitted that the previous officers had handled the situation incorrectly. By the evening, multiple police units arrived. They gave the travelers a formal eviction notice and told them they had 48 hours to leave. And just like that, the people who swore they had the right to stay suddenly weren't so bold anymore. By the second day, the camp was gone. They left behind trash, debris, and a wrecked section of my property, but I'd already planned for that. With the annex construction set to resume, I'm fortifying my property completely, the fencing upgrades being completed ASAP, and I'm installing security cameras and motion-activated floodlights across the entire perimeter. I've also filed an emergency complaint against the original officers citing negligence and misconduct. My lawyer's pursuing damages for the stolen equipment and property destruction. And next time, if someone dares to try and take what's mine, they won't get the chance to set up camp before being escorted out in handcuffs. Oh, this one had me fuming. I don't know what's more infuriating, the fact that these people smashed an 8-foot fence to invade your land, stole your construction materials, or that the officers who showed up basically shrugged and said, "Yeah, this is fine." Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.